Hey, this is Warren Redlick. I'm here with Tim Groseclose. Tim is a professor of political science at, I think, George Mason University. We went to graduate school together at Stanford Business School. Tim had the audacity to actually finish the program. I fled after 3 years and ended up with a master's degree in political science, which is almost as useful as a cup of coffee. So, Tim, I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts as a political scientist on what's likely to happen in the 2024 election?
Okay, I should correct one minor thing. Now, I've been a political scientist most of my career. For instance, my previous job, I was a political science professor at UCLA, political economy. At George Mason, I'm actually in the economics department. So,
Okay.
yes, I joke sometimes that for my midlife crisis, I became an economist.
So does that make you more esteemed in the public eye or less esteemed in the public
well,
eye?
yeah, that's part. Some people say, well, you left this very prestigious school, UCLA, to go to a less prestigious George Mason. I said, but on the other hand, I think economics professor is more prestigious than poli sci professor, so it's not clear. And I can't say, I probably shouldn't say this, but if you judge by salaries, I got a raise, so the salary up a little bit. So maybe
I think it was Peter Thiel said if the name science is in your field, then it's not really science. He was mocking political science, and then computer science had that. This was Peter Thiel was being interviewed by Joe Rogan, and he was saying how computer science had that negative connotation. Then all of a sudden, computer science became the most important one.
Yeah. Well, earlier we were talking about Karl Popper, the famous philosopher of science, and he would say, by his definition, mathematics and computer science is not a science. If it's not doesn't have empirical tests in it, it's not a science.
Where political science, at least how we did it in grad school, was trying to be a science.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's been one of my missions to try to make it more of a science. To answer your question, I think it requires a little bit of economics and political science. You said, what's my thoughts of what's going to happen in the election? There's various models trying to predict presidential elections, and all of those models none of them do as well as the betting markets. So if you want to predict anything, usually go to a betting market. Is Tesla doing well or not? Look at the stock. You look at the stock price. Okay.
Right.
And if who's going to win the election, look at the betting markets. This is people putting their money where their mouth is. Okay. If there was some model that was so great, the author of the model or someone else would start using that model to bet, and then that would affect the odds, and the odds would reflect that model if the model was so good. So, so I'm almost an advocate.
The rational expectations hypothesis applies to betting markets on presidents.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's various betting markets, and efficient markets would say the prices are going to be about the same. Otherwise,
arbitrage.
There'd be
arbitrage. One market and buying the other.
Exactly. So about any of them will have about the same. Though you have to look at the rules. Some of them say who's going to win the popular vote, who's going to win the electoral college. But just looking at who's going to win the electoral college, my favorite website is election betting odds, electionbettingodds.com. And one of the authors of that is John Stossel, the guy who was at Yeah. And it's got some nice graphics and updates very frequently. And so I looked at it. Maybe I look at this 2 or 3 times a day. So I'm an addict of looking at this website. And it's been saying that it's a coin flip. So now it was before Biden dropped out. It was saying Trump had gotten up to, I think, 60%, maybe 62% chance. Probability that Trump would win. Biden drops out, and then Trump fell when that happened. So the betting markets were saying that Kamala Harris was indeed a better candidate than Biden, and Trump's odds fell to like 55%. And then she, seemed to have some sort of honeymoon effect, and she passed Trump. So like it was 2 days ago, she got up to 54% as her top probability. This morning it was at like 52, 53%. And I just checked 20 minutes ago. It fell to like 49% chance.
Okay.
So I'm looking at it now. Yeah, 49.2. Trump is at 48.7, and then some of the other candidates have a
There's a small bet on Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or something.
Yeah, that's at like 0.3% chance, and still other is at the highest of the. Well, let's see, of the other candidates, Nikki Haley is at 0.6% chance. I guess they're saying. I think part of it, there's all these small probability events, and one is like some candidate could die or drop out, and I guess that's going on with Nikki Haley. But Harris, her odds dropped 2.4% today, and
I don't understand how I don't know how reliable this is. There's a report that she endorsed the 25% tax on unrealized gains. And a 44% capital gains tax rate.
You saw that today?
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, it's 7 a.m. here in Thailand, and I woke up this morning and I looked at X, and X is, I get my news from X.
Okay.
Right. It's funny, by the way, that you watch the presidential odds 3 times a day. I'm a Tesla YouTuber. I'm basically 100% in on Tesla stock, and I check the price like twice a week. And I only check it when people start talking. Like if it goes up a lot or it goes down a lot, people start talking about it on X.
Yeah.
And then I check the stock price. If the stock is relatively stable for a day, I don't see anybody talking about it. I don't bother checking it.
Yeah, that's right. If the stock price hasn't changed, you got to say that news really isn't that important. But somehow the betting markets changed today. So there's some news, and maybe that's it, that Kamala endorse that what'd you say, 25%? No, what
25% tax, and honestly, I read through. I tried to find out what was the source of this, and it's not like Kamala Harris made a public statement. I'm endorsing I'm going to tax unrealized gains at 25%. What happened was there's some website or organization that tracks budget impact of proposals, and they did an analysis of her budget proposal. Where she's going to do $25,000 first-time buyer home.
Yeah. Okay.
Credit or support for buying a home, and they did some analysis, and it came up with like a $1.7 trillion impact on the deficit or something. But in there, they said the campaign didn't make a public statement, but I guess they reached out to the campaign, and the campaign said, we support all the revenue-raising positions of the Biden proposed budget. And in the Biden proposed budget is the 44% capital gains tax and a 25% tax on home buying. And a 25% tax on unrealized gains. So apparently I've got some sort of my LLM generated the wrong words there. Sorry about that. My word prediction feature of my brain got that wrong.
That is big. That taxing unrealized capital gains.
Yeah.
And I think so. I'm kind of friends with a guy named Justin Wolfers. He's got a pretty big presence on Twitter.
Yeah. And just to be clear, it's X now. Its name has changed. I have to defend the platform. The name is X. My trick is I say the X platform.
Okay.
If you say the X platform, then people know what you're talking about. If you say X, they're like, what? But if you say the X platform, it'll come around to it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm old and I've trouble.
The art is formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah.
The platform formerly known as Twitter. Yeah.
So Justin, who I think could be possibly, Council of Economic Advisors for Kamala Harris, and definitely his what's his partner? They're not married, but in essence they are. Betsy Stevenson. But I think both of them would have problems, just as an economist, saying these taxing unrealized capital gains, because that's all of a sudden starts distorting the economy. People start thinking, oh, instead of putting my money in stocks, I'm going to start putting it in land, things that is never traded, and therefore you don't get prices, and then you don't get taxed on these unrealized. And that distorts people's investment decisions. And that's one thing people learn. You go to grad school in economics, you don't want to distort the economy. You know, if
Right.
you can have, you know, whatever the quantities are in an unregulated, you know, free market system, that's what you want. Now, often you want the taxes and regulations, but you hope that you don't affect quantities. But that thing is going to affect quantities. People are going to take their money out of stocks and put them into something else. So that is huge. So I think even like these very left-wing PhD economists, academic economists, are going to be kind of queasy about that. Are probably not going to endorse that idea.
You just triggered me to ask you about this. Kamala's father is Donald Harris, professor emeritus professor of economics. I forget what university he was at.
Stanford. He was at Stanford.
Okay. And he describes himself as a Marxist economist. So my question is, does that make him a Marxist? If you're a Marxist economist, does that mean you're a Marxist?
Yeah, that's close enough. You know, it's like, yeah, you're probably to the left of Bernie Sanders, or at least, you know, left as Bernie Sanders.
Because I read, you know, a lot of his more recent, I did read some of his papers, and a lot of his work was about, you know, he's from Jamaica, and a substantial portion of his work is about, you know, how to fix the Jamaican economy. And he applies the tool, whatever the tools of Marxist economics are, he seems to be applying those tools to, like, well, how do we make Jamaica's economy better? And I don't know how much they listen to him. I don't have the impression that Jamaican economy's gotten that much better.
Oh my gosh. Two things. There's a great author named Richard Rhodes, wrote Making the Atomic Bomb. That I think is one of the top 5 books ever. And I just saw him on a podcast, and he was talking about Oppenheimer, who's one of the, you know, main subjects of this book. And Richard Rhodes, who seems like not ideological at all. And they asked him, you know, was Oppenheimer a communist? Was he, you know, a traitor for the Soviet Union? And Rhodes said, no, I don't think he was a actual communist. You know, he was sympathetic with some of the things. So, but on some train ride, I think he read Marx and just came across thinking Marx is an idiot. You know, someone who actually understands the math and sees someone trying to do the pseudo math would just think Marx is not. And so I wonder if that's what's going on. Someone trying to apply these kind of wrong-headed ideas.
I just got to ask you, I come at the election, and I have historically voted Libertarian every presidential election. And one of the motivating factors was that I rarely saw a significant difference between the Republican candidate and the Democratic candidate. And because my views on what's important have changed, I now see a really dramatic difference between Harris and Trump. And the issue is Elon, which we'll talk about Elon in a minute. But when I look at Harris, fundamentally, like, you know, that my main objection to her is that she's anti-Elon, that Biden has been anti-Elon since before the election even started. And I think Elon is important for the future of humanity. Elon curing brain diseases, lowering cost of access to space, increasing use of solar power in a way that is actually cost effective. There's a lot of things that he's doing that I think, the Boring Company tunnel system, there's a whole bunch of things that I think are important. And the truth-seeking AI as opposed to a politically correct or woke AI. I think those are important for the future. Not to mention the free speech platform that this video will be appearing on, the X platform. When I look at Harris, one of my criticisms is that I think she's a Marxist. And by the way, I think George Bush Jr. was basically a socialist. Like, I'm so far to the right on economic issues. I think they're all commies. But, you know, her father, with Kamala Harris, her father is an open Marxist. Her mother pretty clearly was a Marxist. So she was raised by Marxists. That's by implication, because she met her husband at a left-wing protest at Berkeley. Like, well, Berkeley's already Marxist. If you're on a left-wing protest at Berkeley, then you're clearly Marxist. And then 2019, 2020, she was the farthest left Democrat in the Senate. 2019, they removed the ranking, but 2019, she voted left of Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is basically, he'll say, I'm not a communist, I'm a democratic socialist. It's just rebranding. It's like New Coke. The thing that I've noticed is I don't think the label Marxist hurts a candidate. It's like the voters have just become immune to it. Do you think that there's a long-winded way of getting to this question of the Democrats will call Trump a fascist when they called Bush a fascist and they called Reagan a fascist, and the Republicans call Kamala a Marxist and they called Obama a Marxist. Does the label Marxist, has it lost all meaning and the voters don't care? Or do they not believe it? To me, it's like she was raised by Marxists. She talks like a Marxist. She votes like a Marxist. How much more do you need? But voters don't care. What are your thoughts on whether voters care about labels like Marxist and fascist?
Yeah. Well, I think at least for the American system, there's so many the separation of powers that it's hard to get something done. Congress and there's the filibuster in the Senate, especially. It's so even if the president is super left wing, there's a check by the Congress. Now, I think that is becoming less. That I think voters are getting less and less educated, and they don't quite understand what an executive order is. Now, an executive order, so these are legal, but what it is, people should think of it as the president is the CEO of all of government. Sometimes a law has some leeway, or it's vague about how exactly it's going to be enforced or interpreted. And so the president will write a memo to his or her employees, all the government employees, saying this is how we're going to interpret it. And that's legal. But I think Obama started doing things like this DACA. That was something where he actually wrote an executive order that was not legal. So he said, we are not going to enforce the current laws on the books in terms of immigration. If someone is an illegal immigrant, we're just not going to prosecute them, and he's violating the take care clause of the Constitution. And I don't think voters really understood that. And when they see something that, and then the Democrats especially, when they'll talk about why he wrote this executive order, say, well, it's because the Republican Congress wouldn't give him the law that he wants. So, that's an excuse to do whatever you want, to act like a king. And so that worries me, that a president will start using these executive orders, treating them like they're an alternative way to make law when they're not. Okay. And that kind of worries me that Kamala could start doing it. And if she's a Marxist, so I think that Maduro may be the best, maybe most similar to her. Now, I don't think she'll be quite as bad as a Maduro, but whether she's a Marxist, I think there is something like a Marxist gene, and I think she has it. Now, I think
why don't voters care about the label? Do they just discard it, or do they? It used to be that Americans were, Marxism was evil from an American perspective.
In some ways, maybe they do. I sense that they're backing off when she started talking about having price controls. This stuff. Yeah. These are anti-gouging laws with the grocery prices, and I noticed there was a backlash against that. And I sense the Democrats backing down a little bit from that, or at least I sense that the public is not very happy with this. And people have said, look, this is what third world countries do, is start putting these price controls. And
do you think that people, I thought the thing about that particular issue was, I like my local grocery store. Yes. People in Florida love Publix. We don't blame Publix for high prices. Yes. We know. And I think most people know, well, I can go over to this other grocery store. If Publix had control over prices, then, I can go to Aldi. I can go to, I can go to Walmart for groceries. There's a whole bunch of choices for groceries. But I think on a local level, I'm from Albany, New York, and Price Chopper is the most popular grocery store in Albany, New York. And the family that owns the grocery chain is, out there in the community, and they're supporting a bunch of issues. Publix, very, very prominent with its efforts, and mostly grocery stores make an effort to make it a pleasant place to go. And then you'll have the budget chain, and you're like, well, you go to your regular chain, and all right, the prices might be a little higher on this thing, but I could go to that budget grocery store, but I hate that place.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And there's people who are like, they're really, right on the edge, and they've got to shop as cheap as they can, and they go to Walmart and they buy the crappy groceries at Walmart or Aldi.
Yeah.
So I don't think, blaming grocery store chains for grocery store prices is effective, because people like grocery stores.
Yeah. You know what else? And like I said, the people like Justin Wolfers, Betsy Stevenson, these kind of left-wing economists, I think even them would all say, if there's any industry that approximates perfect competition, grocery stores are going to be. If there's anything that we would say the competitive market in the U.S., grocery stores is one. I think people kind of understand that. Another thing that I think I haven't seen, I'm waiting for this argument to say, well, if the grocery stores are gouging people, why do they do it only during the Biden administration? Why weren't they doing this during Trump? Do they become more greedy when there's a Democratic president? And so I think that one may die. That thing. Now I looked at. Sorry, it was actually while I was listening to the radio in the car that I thought, what is the details? The other thing I would love to see Kamala Harris asked about her policy. So I think she's a little bit lazy, and she doesn't actually even know what policies her staff are giving her. And something telling, when she gave that speech, she's reading from the teleprompter, and she says, I'm against, I want to have instead of saying anti-gouging law, she said anti-gauging. She read it wrong. I think she was just reading from and I'd love to say, like, what do you define gouging? What would this mean when you write it into law? And at least according to the story I heard on the radio, that what it would be is just some sort of vague law, the statute that would give the FTC the authority to say something a price is unreasonable. And I thought, oh my gosh, now you're making the FTC the king. Yeah. Of course, the president's the boss of the FTC. So this is, but I would love someone to ask a report like a Lester Holt or someone to just quiz Kamala Harris, define gouging. I don't think she knows.
But has she? I mean, this goes to. I want to go back to political outcomes, political strategies, and so on. I don't think she's done a real interview since long before she became the candidate. To the extent that she does interviews, she does fluff interviews, and then she can't. She'll say that she, her favorite living rapper is Tupac, who's been dead for like 20 years. I think that they've adopted the strategy that they think they don't need her to do a legit interview. And if you go back to, I think it was 2016, Hillary was debating Trump, and Donna Brazile funneled the questions to the Hillary campaign in advance. That was, and she bragged, and she's proud of it, right? And I think that there seems to be something in the Democratic Party strategy of never take a real question. I think Joe Biden's a perfect example of, we don't want our candidates, to go off script, right? They really believe in scripting their candidates. Yeah. And it's the thing that strikes me, listen, I have a lot of friends who are Democrats, and I don't understand it, but it doesn't bother them that their candidates are completely scripted. The Democratic Party has been so effective at demonizing Trump that it's like, well, I don't care if it's Stalin, right? I'll take Stalin over Trump. I'll take Lenin over Trump. They really don't care. Trump is evil incarnate. You're electing, Satan, or I forget the character from the Marvel movies, Thanos. You're electing Thanos, right? He's going to destroy the universe, and like everything's going to collapse if Trump, somehow, despite his first term not being that bad, his second term, he'll be a dictator, blah, blah, blah. I jokingly say that January 6th were mostly peaceful protests.
Okay. Yeah.
Which I don't even think that's a joke. I mean, I think that's, well, you guys said the George Floyd protests were mostly peaceful protests.
I know some people who were there. Yeah, they definitely were peaceful. The people I know went to the rally. They had no idea that people were going to storm the Capitol. And then the mob walked to the Capitol, and my friends thought, oh yeah, this will just be another protest right by the Capitol. And then they started breaking down the gates, and my friends, they went through one gate and they said, maybe this is not the thing to do. And then they walked back, but they did not walk into the Capitol. That was, I think, a small percentage.
While we're on this, I've got to ask you, the Governor Whitmer kidnapping was actually, the plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer was actually mostly thrown out of court because of entrapment. Federal agents basically created the plot. And recruited some morons to join the plot, right? And the morons get prosecuted. They're not really leaders. The feds are. I look at what happened on January 6th, and I'm like, I think the feds did the worst of it. I think there were federal agents in the crowd. There's a guy named I forget the guy's name. There was this one particular guy who's like going around telling people, here's what we're going to do. And the day before, they're like pointing at him and saying, he's a Fed, don't listen to him. And, the guy got like some like minor slap on the wrist punishment for what he did when it was like, he's there at the gates telling people to go in.
Tomorrow, we need to go into the Capitol. Into the Capitol. What? No! Peacefully. Fed. We are going to the Capitol, where our problems are. It's that direction. Please spread the word.
So I have a little bit of inside information on one of those stories. So do you remember the woman who was shot, who was killed?
Yeah.
We're outside Nancy Pelosi's office, and it was one of the Capitol Police guys who shot her, right?
Yeah.
And do you remember the video came from this guy?
Oh, yeah.
That I remember his name. His name's John Sullivan. Yeah. Black guy who had led like a Black Lives Matter protest in Oregon. No, in Utah.
Yeah.
And I think had been arrested for it, was about to be prosecuted. And anyway, he sold the video to CNN, and he was interviewed on CNN. And some people were saying that he was a plant, that he was basically a left-wing guy, and that the left wing planted him. Well,
maybe he was a Fed plant in the Black Lives Matter protest too.
Well, possibly, except I know people who know him.
Yeah.
Okay. If you read about this guy, John Sullivan, he was a speed skater, and he did long track speed skating, worked out at the Oval in Utah, Salt Lake City. Okay. If you go to YouTube and type in Groseclose, it used to be videos of me, but now
now it's your son. Yeah.
Yes. It's this guy. He represents the Philippines. He's pretty good, but I know all the guys in the speed skating world. And one person told me, yeah, I was Facebook friends with John Sullivan. I don't think he has any ideology at all. Okay. Mm-hmm. He just wanted to make some money. He's kind of a ne'er-do-well. He was actually not that good in speed skating, but he made this commercial for Uber because he was also an Uber driver, and he called himself a world-class speed skater. The speed skaters who were better than him hated him for that. They said he is not world-class. There are women speed skaters who are beating him. But and I happen to know that when he lived in Salt Lake City at the Oval, he had a roommate, and I knew the dad of that roommate. He stole about $2,000 worth of equipment from the roommate. He was just Vino would do whatever he can to make money. So this is the guy who some people were calling a plant and part of a conspiracy. And then I knew better that, this guy, he just wanted some money. And I think he did the Black Lives Matter protests because he realized he could get paid by these rich left-wing donors for starting these protests. It was a way to make money. So, okay, so we're on the January 6th protests.
No. So I wanted to turn, although I want to go a little darker.
Okay. Let's do it.
A federal government that spends, I don't know, $10 trillion a year. I'm making up the number. I forget how much. Maybe it's $6 trillion a year. If you believe in a deep state, and I do, if you believe that the national security state has gotten out of control, and I do, I think that one thing that a national security state would do, imagine we were in a Soviet style economy for a second. If you were running the government and you were running the national security state, you would plant operatives in the ordinary population who are not particularly active. They're just monitoring people, and then every once in a while you might say, "Hey, I need you to do this to influence things."
Okay.
But you could have 100,000 people in the population, pay them $100,000 a year each. They get a regular job too, right? They're they might have a government job, right? But you're giving them an extra $50,000 or $100,000 a year, and their job is to be a national security operative, and really they're just spying on the American people. Am I crazy for thinking they might be doing that?
Let's see. So about like whether there's a deep state or not, there is, to some degree, yes. If nothing else, here's something. So I live in the DC area, and God, there's so many people working in government. One time I was at my son's soccer game when he was 6, and we just started polling all the parents how many worked for the federal government or was like a consultant for the federal government, and it was like half. Around here, that like lots and lots of people. There's something that when you work in one of these agencies, there'll be, the boss who's a political appointee, and maybe, that person's underling is also a political appointee, but down the line, you just get these civil servants. And the civil servants call the political appointees the summer help.
Right.
They're not going to be here for long. If they tell you to do something, just ignore them. They'll be gone after a while. You don't have to worry. We'll do whatever we want.
And they can't fire you anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And they know that, and I think that's true in the CIA. It's true in the FBI. They kind of know, like, we don't have to listen to the elected officials. And that's the only route of the voters having to control these people. So there is a bureaucracy that I think is out of control. At least to a small extent, they've gone rogue.
Yeah.
So are there people spying? And well, yeah, I think they can use their power. I think a lot of people they understate just the extent of ideology. And so here's an example. Do you remember Joe the plumber when Obama ran? Okay, he was this guy that was a plumber in I think it was Columbus, but somewhere in Ohio. And then all of a sudden he criticized Obama. Okay. And then all of a sudden they started releasing these things about him. Like, one, he wasn't a licensed plumber. And then 2, I think he was behind on his payments to his ex-wife. And like, where did that come from? Well, it turns out it was some bureaucrat in the Ohio state government who wasn't told by her boss. She wasn't told by the Obama campaign. She was just this left-wing ideologue who hated someone who was criticizing Obama. She did it all herself. Right. And I think that there probably are lots and lots of people in government who, out of ideology, could do things like that.
I think, just as an example, I think the Department of Homeland Security, was created under Bush Light. I call him Bush Light because he's like his father, but not weighted down with all that experience and intelligence and all that. But, George Bush Jr. created the Department of Homeland Security. And then I remember, I'm from Albany, New York. And I was talking to somebody at some point, and I'm like, hey, what's that? I've been living in Florida. And I came back to Albany for something. I'm like, hey, what's that building? Oh, that's the Department of Homeland Security building. I'm like, why is there a Department of Homeland Security building in Albany, New York? And I think they just started creating locations. And now you've got all these people who are working for DHS. You got all these people working for various government agencies. And I have a friend who works, I think she works for the military, and she'll probably watch this video now. And I'm always wondering, like, is she monitoring us? Like, she's part of it's like a group, and we're all chatting and we're talking about our personal lives, and we talk about, Tesla and Elon or whatever. And at a certain point, I started to wonder, wait, is she monitoring us? Is it part of her job to monitor? Every one of them has to monitor, they build a community or they join a community, and then they follow 100 people. They're tracking they identify like Warren's really outspoken on X. Let's follow him a little closer. Like the quiet guy in the corner, who doesn't really say anything. You don't need to monitor that guy as much, but you want to I could see a strategy of we'll put 10,000 people out there and they'll each monitor 100 people that we think are the most important and just keep track of what's going on with them. And they'll decide who needs more attention. Right. Am I being too much of a conspiracy theorist to think something like that's going on?
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Is there something in the government? Now, we do know from the Twitter files that the government was getting involved with telling Twitter what to do and these social media.
Facebook and yeah.
Now is the
by the way, sorry, the guy's name was Roy Epps, the guy who was at the January 6th protest.
Yeah.
Slap on the wrist, and when when you mentioned the government and manipulating social media, if you Google who is Roy Epps, the Google results are no, he's not a deep state operative. Like, instead of presenting both sides of the story, first of all, when you first started Googling who is Roy Epps, Google had no answer. And then eventually, the mainstream media wrote a bunch of articles debunking the Roy Epps conspiracy theory. So you get the results are all no, it's not it's just a conspiracy theory. And there's well, wait a minute, what's the actual theory? And you can't find it on Google. And I still to this day am convinced that Roy Epps was at least a federal informant.
Okay.
There's no way that guy was not. I'm sorry for going off on a tangent, but there's no way that guy was not working for the feds.
I think that's a very reasonable hypothesis. That at least some sort of undercover witness that they're protecting.
But he's telling people go in. He's telling people, move the gate, go in. He's actively promoting. People say Trump caused the January 6th thing. Trump said, go down and protest at the Capitol and be a peaceful protest, whatever. Let's let our representatives in Congress know that we want them to do the right thing. Trump's language in that speech was not go in there and tear the place apart, right? He didn't say anything like that.
I agree.
This guy is out there actively telling people to go in, and he gets a slap on the wrist punishment. What happened to all these other January 6th guys who got all this punishment? This guy is telling people to go in.
Yeah. I did talk to a DEA agent once. This was a woman who was head of intelligence, or she was pretty high up.
Yeah.
And so I was asking her about about these agencies not cooperating with each other during 9/11. He said, that can happen. So what can happen is we've got our own witness in DEA. We're going to have a trial where we're going to get our bad guy. Now, what happens if that person could also be a good witness for the FBI, some FBI case?
Right.
We don't want we don't even want the FBI to know about our witness, because they're going to use our witness at some low level and give away our cover, that this person is in for. So I could totally see something like that, and how the FBI or the DEA or the DHS is going to say, no, we don't know anything about Roy Epps, when they really do.
Right.
So I can imagine something like that. Let's see. What I was going to say something. Oh, January 6th, the other thing, so earlier we were talking about Karl Popper, the philosopher of science.
Yeah.
Huge hero of mine. And one thing he talks about for science is always ask, is your theory falsifiable? Is there some experiment that would make you disbelieve your own theory? Okay. And I try to apply that in my private life, in my political beliefs. And so
I applied it to dating.
Yes, I think, yeah, especially like what would make you believe that this woman is not the love of your life?
The answer, by the way, to that is a 7-hour road trip. Get in the car with her for 7 hours. If you don't want to kill her by the end of a 7-hour road trip, she's the one.
My aunt told me, now, Tim, whatever you do, before you marry a girlfriend, you go sailing with her.
Sailing? That's a good one.
And I didn't do that with my wife, but I did teach her how to operate a stick shift. And we weren't yelling at each other. And I thought, this is the one. This is 7 hours. So, but January 6th. So I'm like, marginally a Trump fan. And I think I probably will vote for him in the election. I did last election. He was probably my least favorite of all the Republican candidates, though.
Yeah, I'm a DeSantis guy.
Me too. I'm a
DeSantis guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I thought DeSantis would have a hard time defeating Biden, and even though I didn't really care, my own ideology for Nikki Haley, but I thought, but she has a better chance of winning. I might have liked her anyway. At January 6th. I thought, no, I don't think Trump was guilty of these things. But I thought, no, the Popperian in me, I should say, what would make me disbelieve it? And so I waited for those January 6th congressional hearings. I say, if they find some sort of email or some sort of telephone call or something, or some sort of, hard evidence of him directing people to do this, that he said something like, to the Proud Boys, bring the guns. There was nothing. That January 6th hearing, they found nothing like that.
Right.
And so, you think of like Sherlock Holmes case of the non-barking dog, that was the non-barking dog. There was no email in that. And I thought, okay, yeah, Trump did not direct this. And then on top of it, he had directed some of his underlings to try to bring in the National Guard, but then the Capitol Police and the Sergeant at Arms rejected that. So, yeah, I don't think Trump was masterminding in January 6th. Now, I do think maybe you can say there was a crime of omission, that he waited a little bit to tell them to stop doing that, but that's about, I think, the worst that he did. And I thought that he was a little bit too harsh on Mike Pence. I think I'm side more with Mike Pence than with Donald Trump.
Well, I think fundamentally Trump was wrong in his conclusion that there was some political way to change the results of the election.
Yeah, you know what though? If you read that statute,
yeah,
and this is that lawyer Eastwick, started with an E. Guy had something with I think the Claremont Institute, and he was that lawyer, and it looks like he's going to be prosecuted. Might even have to go to jail just for giving bad legal advice. That's crazy, I think that. But his theory, he read the statute, and it says that the vice president will make a decision whether these challenges are valid or not.
Right.
Okay. And then it says, and it used the passive voice. It said it will be decided whether that decision is correct or not. And when I read that, now Pence talked about this. He said, he talked about if he goes to heaven and, meets some of these writers of this statute, he said, why weren't you more clear on this? It was genuinely a little bit ambiguous. Now, my reading of it, and so I've done lots of work and used to teach a class about the rules of Congress. And my interpretation of that is that always whenever there's some sort of ambiguity about the rules of procedure within the House or Senate. Right. The presiding officer makes a ruling, but that is always subject to appeal, but an appeal by a majority of the body. And when I read that, it will be decided, that's what it meant, that Pence could make a ruling, but then the majority of the Senate could overrule whatever he wanted to do. So, and then the Democrats had a majority at the time. So, yeah, Pence could have ruled the way Trump wanted him to, but he would have been overruled. By the Senate. Yeah, my interpretation of that statute.
So, all right, I want to turn to a different topic here. The reason that I decided to support Trump, and I don't like Trump, I historically have never liked Trump. There's a whole lot there. I think he was terrible on spending. He's better on COVID than Biden, but I don't think he was great on COVID, at least not initially. But one of the things for me, the thing I've really almost focused my life on to some extent is I believe that what Elon Musk is doing in his businesses is really good for the future of humanity. Whether it's shifting to electric cars, and you might not electric cars. I love electric cars. That's a whole long conversation. I think electrification, going away from fossil fuels long-term is a good thing. Doesn't have to be done overnight. Elon even doesn't support doing it overnight, but over the next 10, 20, 50 years, shifting to more electric, solar, wind, renewables, and nuclear maybe is better than continuing to burn coal. Right, I think that's pretty straightforward. As someone who's breathing polluted air today, and Thailand has more polluted air than America.
Well, if nothing else, we're going to run out.
And that's Elon's theory. At some point, it will run out.
Yeah.
And then you look at building tunnels to solve traffic problems. Neuralink, taking a guy who's quadriplegic and letting him control a mouse and giving him a lot more access, and the long-term prospects for Neuralink, and lowering cost of access to space. And now Starlink is delivering internet anywhere on Earth, and rural communities are getting better internet. There's a whole bunch of things he's doing that are great. And I look at, because that's become, I'm like you can call me a one-issue voter, and like, is it good for Elon's businesses, right? And Trump is not great, but he's generally positive about Elon. So he, just an example, there was a SpaceX launching NASA astronauts to the space station, and Trump showed up for the launch. Biden and Harris have never shown up for a SpaceX launch. SpaceX has done 13 launches of NASA astronauts to the space station, and the Biden administration has ignored all of them. And Biden had this EV summit when he first got elected, and he didn't invite Tesla to an EV summit. And he said that Mary Barra led the electrification of the auto industry. And, there's been there was some moment where the media was asking Biden about Elon's involvement in foreign countries. And Biden said, we're going to take a look at that. And, there's all these federal investigations into Elon's businesses that, Elon and others call it lawfare. What happened in Delaware, was that really politically influenced? So I see the Biden administration and then the Kamala Harris administration being at war against Elon. And I'm like, look, I'm a Tesla shareholder, right? So I want Tesla to do well. But it's not about my Tesla stock. I think my Tesla stock will be fine one way or another. I don't want the United States government to be at war with Elon Musk. I want a United States government that supports not just Elon, but other entrepreneurs who are doing things that are going to make society better. And then you have Biden and Harris who, and I would go back to Obama as well, although Obama was better in practice. They basically demean the role that entrepreneurs play in advancing society. And so I'm that one issue voter. So I want to turn on that and say, Elon seems to be, Elon has endorsed Trump. I don't know whether he's giving him money or not. I think that part of the story has been exaggerated, but he's supporting Trump, and he's of course supporting free speech on the X platform. What do you think Elon's influence is on the election?
I don't think that's going to matter that much. I'm actually doing a project on looking at the effect of campaign ads. And I have this anecdote. I was just writing about it today. So if you look at the debate between Trump and Biden, okay, now do the thought experiment. Instead of thinking of it as a debate, suppose that had been a campaign commercial. Suppose the Trump people had a 90-minute campaign commercial that showed Biden in this feeble state, was not on top of things. That would have been the most significant campaign commercial ever in the history of campaigns, right? Okay. Right. Not only was the message very significant, but that thing lasted 90 minutes, whereas the average campaign commercial lasts 30 seconds. So, 180 times the length, the reach of it, 100 million people. I think that I have that right. It's at least 60 million. I mean, it was like Super Bowl type thing. And the average campaign commercials, is lucky to get a million or 2 million or 3 million if it's on, say,
not to mention how many clips there are of Biden stammering and looking like a complete and total moron.
Yeah,
that was published on Facebook, and I don't know if Facebook suppressed them, but they were all over X.
But if you think of that as a thought experiment, suppose it was a campaign commercial, that would be the most effective campaign commercial ever in history. Okay.
Yeah.
Look at Real Clear Politics, though. How much did it shift voting? Very tiny amount. So you look at Real Clear Politics the day before the debate, and then look at Real Clear Politics like 6 days after, once they've had a chance to get all the respondents in the surveys to have seen that debate. All it did, basically, Trump's percentage support stayed about the same. Biden's dropped about a percentage. But of that percentage, only like 0.5% went to Trump. The other half just went to, no candidate, third candidate, or nothing. So if you look at just the two-party vote, Trump's percentage only increased by like 0.5%. Yeah. You think like all the money you could put into having these campaigns, at least for presidential elections, is now maybe 0.5%. Maybe that's significant. If it's a very close race, if you can get 0.5%, that may change the probability, 10 or 20%. Maybe that you could say that. But even if Musk is going to give a lot of money, I don't think. Biden, I think it was almost 2-1. Biden outspent Trump in the last election. Yeah. And Hillary outspent Trump by, I think, something like 2-1. Yet Trump won. So
when we were studying back in the day, there was a professor, I think he was at UC San Diego. It's Gary Jacobson, and he talked about congressional elections. And what he basically said was incumbent spending didn't matter. Challenger spending was really, really important. I ran for Congress twice, right? And I spent like $25,000 in my biggest campaign, and I moved the needle like a tiny bit, right? Yeah. And the problem is that the voters all know who the incumbent is. So if the incumbent spends money, he can't boost his name. And like two big things are, you want to boost your name recognition, and you want to boost the other guy's negatives. So if you're the incumbent and you spend money to boost your name recognition, you already have it. There's no point. Everybody already knows who their congressman is. Every voter, they've already voted. They've already seen your name in the voting booth. They know who you are. Yeah. And if you want to boost the other guy's negatives, if the guy isn't spending any money, when the incumbent spends money to attack the challenger, he boosts the challenger's name recognition.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a negative effect. And let's say you're a Democratic incumbent and there's a Republican challenger, and you start spending attacking the Republican challenger. Now more Republicans know who he is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in a presidential election, everybody knows who both the candidates are.
Yeah.
So, the question is, I think the strategy that I saw the most that's the most effective is, can you reduce the motivation of the other guy's supporters to get out and vote? It's not, we watch the Downs voting, there's this idea that there's a left and a right, and you want to get the people in the middle.
Yeah.
And I think that the way campaigns have gone is the people in the middle don't care enough to vote. So it's less about trying to peel off the median voter, and it's more about increasing turnout on your side and decreasing turnout on the other side. That's where the campaign spending goes. So you have this October surprise that, oh, here's the skeleton in the closet, then, here's the P-tape, here's the Russia collusion scam, whatever. You come up with these things and you try to figure out. So like when I say Kamala Harris is a Marxist, that one doesn't stick. That doesn't reduce her voter turnout. Yeah. So the question is, what could Trump reveal about Kamala in the days before the election that might discourage Democrats from turning out to vote? What could Kamala reveal about Trump? I mean, I don't know if you could build more negatives for Trump than they've already built, right? There's no like great big secret. They released the Epstein client list and Trump's at the top of the list. I don't know what do they got left. I don't think they have anything left to build this negative. So it's like it doesn't. So then just to go along with this theory, and this is partly from having been a Democratic, I was both a Republican committeeman and a Democratic committeeman. Democratic committeeman first. I think it's the more money you have, the more money you can pay off your operatives. The more money you have to funnel to organizations that are going to support you in other ways, or support people who are like, Joe Biden can funnel money to the United Auto Workers because the United Auto Workers is supporting his candidacy or something like that. So I actually think campaign finance is far less about swaying voters and far more about paying off people in your entourage. And like you said, the debate didn't really hurt Biden that much. So why did they replace him? Well, it might have hurt him in terms of raising money. And so the campaign is less about who's going to win the election and more about how do we funnel money to there's this whole industry of there's like a supply chain for presidential campaigns, right? And we've got to funnel money down the supply chain, and the more money we raise, the more we can support our supply chain. And actually supporting the supply chain is actually more important than winning the election. You want to win the election because that means you're going to raise more money for your supply chain. But if you don't, if Kamala is able to generate more campaign contributions, then there's more money for the supply chain. Am I completely off the ranch with this theory that, like,
that's an excellent point about the getting people to vote? And I have to say there is some excellent research. These guys both that used to be at Yale, Alan Gerber and Don Green. They did this thing. It turns out Yale, they had tons of research money, and they just used the research money to do their own experiment. So what they did is they waited for an election. It was a local election in Connecticut, and then they hired a bunch of research assistants to go door knocking, and they randomized where the research assistants would go door knocking. So this precinct versus that precinct, and so it's like a biology experiment, or control and treatment, and they could increase the turnout by something like 7%.
I'm going to crack you up now. So I ran for town board, and I think this was this is not the year that I got elected to the town board, but like 2 years before, I ran in like a Democratic Party. I don't know if you call it a primary or whatever. And I chose 2 districts that were the most heavily Democrat or something like that. I'm a Democrat running in a Democratic primary for whatever. And I distributed a flyer. Like I went out by myself and just put this flyer in people's, front doors, right? Mm-hmm. This is a small town, right? You can go to a district and there's, maybe there's 100 voters or 200 likely voters in that district or whatever. So I just went and put this flyer, and it was a don't vote for Warren flyer. Right. And it was the reasons to not vote for Warren were reasons that you would vote for Warren. But written in a way, I don't remember the specifics, but written in a way that it looks like Warren's, like, don't vote for Warren. Like, don't vote for Warren. He's too pro-choice. Wow. Right. Wow. Right. Warren, Warren wants to legalize abortion until the kid's born or something like that, or until the kid turns 18 or some crazy, but and I think it said it was from Conservatives Against Redlick or something like that.
Wow. Okay.
Right? And it had a major, like, I could see that I got more votes in those, because, there's like 31 districts, I'm going to say, in the town, and, 20 of them are heavily Democrat, right? And so I picked 2, and those 2 districts, I got more votes, significantly more votes by doing that. And then another example of my political,
about the percentage, you think that?
It's I don't remember the numbers, but it was like a really substantial increase in votes for me in those two districts. Like I should have distributed those flyers everywhere. It wasn't like, I don't think I won either of the districts, but I went from like 10% to 20% or something like that.
Warren, you can publish that as a piece in a poli-sci journal.
I probably should have. And then the other experiment I did was when I was a libertarian candidate for governor of New York in 2010, and I spent money. I spent about $25,000, and I bought TV and radio ads in my home community, Albany, New York, which is Greater Albany, includes Saratoga, Schenectady, Rensselaer, Troy, and I bought radio ads in Syracuse, and I think my overall vote was less than 1% of the vote statewide. But in my home area where I did TV and radio, and I had some name recognition, especially in my hometown, right? And I had some limited, very, very limited media coverage from before, and maybe a little bit more media coverage because I was a local guy, right? But I got like 4% of the vote in the greater capital region, and I got 2% of the vote in Syracuse, and I had no connection to Syracuse whatsoever. And so I got, spending $5,000 on radio. No, I got 2% of the vote. It's not like I won, right? But it was better than 1%.
Wow.
Right. So,
you know what? I should, Alan Gerber and Don Green I should send them your email address, because they did a kind of similar experiment.
Yeah.
The Rick Perry campaign. So when Rick Perry was running for re-election as governor in Texas, Don Green and Alan Gerber and a couple other co-authors, they convinced the campaign to let them run an experiment. And they flipped coins to decide this region and that region were going to run a radio ad.
Yeah.
And sure enough, they found that it had an effect. But one thing interesting they found, I remember that the half-life of the effect was very quick.
Yeah.
In 3 days, it went away. Or half of the effect went away. So, after 12 days, that half-life has gone to almost nothing. And so I'm curious, do you remember your ads in Syracuse? How long before the election did they take place?
Oh, I ran them for weeks.
Okay.
I mean, they probably ended right before the election.
Okay.
But I ran them for weeks. Yeah. But the point of these ads was not, it was more just building name recognition. Okay. Building name recognition isn't going to have the same issue. The other thing that I did, the stunt I did as a town board candidate, was a reverse psychology. I call it reverse psychology campaigning. I actually have this theory that I'm going to create a PAC, like I'm not, if I were doing it for this election, liberals against Trump, right? And then you run your ads like the week before the election in Republican district in Republican areas in swing states, right? So then all of a sudden there's all these radio ads, liberals against Trump, and people get really mad, right? But I don't know how effective it's going to be in a presidential election because people are already highly motivated. But if you did it in a local election, I think it might be more effective. So I think a strategy of creating a legit PAC, right, whose name is, so-and-so against you.
Yeah.
And then you run ads against yourself. Reverse psychology ads against yourself. You do it right before the election, so people don't even realize what's happening until by the time it becomes a story that you played a trick, the election's over. You either won or you didn't win.
Pedophiles against Trump, or
Well, anyway, let me turn this to. I asked you about whether Elon. So I think what you're saying is Elon's endorsement, any campaign spending he might give Trump, is not going to be significant in terms of changing the impact of the election. I think I've got you right on that. So let me just turn to this question of, I was talking to somebody on X, because I have a lot of conversations on the X platform, and this guy said that I said that, Biden's the most powerful man in the world, or I should say the guy who controls Biden's teleprompter is the most powerful man in the world. And maybe Xi Jinping is the most powerful man in the world. You can go there. But I think that people who control governments have a lot more power than someone like Elon, even though he's the most successful entrepreneur and he has important businesses. He's got maybe 100,000 employees who work for him. The president has 2 million or 6 million or whatever, and Xi Jinping probably has 20 million people working for him, if not 50 million people. How do you measure an individual's power? And is there an argument that Elon is more powerful than the leader of a government?
say largely no. I mean, the thing about I think neither of us, the total budget of the U.S. government, I think it's less than 10 trillion, but I think it's more than
6 trillion. I think it's 6 trillion.
Okay. Yeah. So that's every year that the government is spending that much money. And then, what would be the revenue or the total budget of Tesla? Something that, that's
Tesla's revenue is around $100 billion a year.
Yeah. And Elon is having to devote most of that money just to keep the company afloat. It's in a sense not a choice. So he doesn't have the power over that money. So I would say that
Well, but then we talk about the deep state. Does the president have much control over the government?
Okay. Yeah, good point. I might say one way that Elon might be powerful. At least, I think that more than the average person, I like to think of what's going to happen 500 years from now, or And I don't know if you saw the Netflix special, The 3-Body Problem.
No, I haven't seen it yet.
Well, I read the book and I watched the show. The premise of it is that the aliens have found out that Earth is like this great planet for them, and they're going to come and inhabit it, and they got to get rid of the humans. And they tell us, they say, we're coming and we're going to kill all you humans, but it's going to take us 400 years to get there. And it's a great thought experiment. Like, what would you do if you've got 400 years, to save humanity? You're not thinking about next year or even a decade from now. You're thinking 400 years. And you think like, well, what happened 400 years ago? Well, say it's 500. Columbus discovered North America. I think 500 years from now, if we're going to be talking about someone who planted a seed or did something to set us on this course that radically changed humanity, that Elon is going to be the one they talk about. Definitely more than Joe Biden.
So influence over the future.
Yeah.
I think that the things that Elon is doing now, if you believe that we're going to get artificial general intelligence with or without Elon, and artificial general intelligence and then artificial super intelligence is going to change everything anyway, then it's really just sort of like whoever creates artificial general intelligence, and it might or might not be Elon. I think Elon might be the one who creates that as well. But yeah, I just want to say, like, my pitch for the future is like, I see a future where the air gets cleaner. I'm not so much a climate change guy. I don't really care whether it's 400 parts per million or 420 parts per million. 1,000 parts per million is clearly bad, but that's, hundreds of years away.
I worry more about getting us to Mars.
Getting us to Mars, being humanity expanding into space, but curing brain disease, giving us the ability, with brain implants to communicate with the machines better, and maybe helping us live healthier lives. And I think there's a lot of different things he's doing that are going to make life better for humanity. And very clearly for the future of humanity, if he's able to build a 1 million-person colony on Mars, that's a pretty radical change in the state of humanity.
Oh yeah.
And I people think it's crazy. The one hurdle I have with that, I'm going to ask you your opinion about this. Like, I'm all in on Elon. I'm not going to Mars.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't see. I do think you'll find people to go to Mars, but if you want to build a 1 million-person colony on Mars, that's 80 million people would be 1% of Earth's population, right?
Yeah.
So you need, less than 0.1%, in the ballpark of 0.01% of the population to be willing to go. Like, I think, but you want qualified people, right? You're not going to send 90. When you think what percentage of the world's population is over the age of, say 65, right? You're probably not sending. I'm almost 60, right? I'm not an engineer. Like, I talk on camera, and I was a lawyer. Like, I don't think I'm that useful on a Mars colony. Right? I don't know what you need on a Mars colony, but you probably don't need a YouTuber to make the Mars colony succeed. You probably need guys who can actually fix stuff.
Yeah.
Right. That's your high priority. So,
yeah.
So, of the useful population, right? Of the population of people who are actually useful and can actually get stuff done, you're probably down to, from 8 billion people, you're probably down to 800 million people, let's say, that are useful.
Yeah. Okay.
And now you need 1 million people. So you're starting to get to like, okay, so then like for me personally, like I don't hate the idea of going to Mars, right? I'm willing to make the trip and endure the hardships of going to Mars, but you have an adult child. I have 2 adult children. People don't realize this. You go to Mars, number one, you can't come home for 30 months.
Yeah.
The minute your ship leaves Earth, you're not coming back for 30 months. You're not going to touch your kid for 30 months. You're not going to be in the same room with your kid for 30 months. And then communications, at the closest, it's 4 minutes each way for the speed of light to travel from Earth to Mars. So your conversation with your kid, assuming you have the bandwidth to even have a conversation, like a FaceTime, let's say, is you send a message 8 minutes later. If it takes them, you might not get a response for 10 minutes. So there's no, like you and I are having a live conversation right now. There's no live conversation with your kid for 30 months.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So that level of separate. Now, my kids are adults and, something happens to your kid. You can't get back. Right? Your kid's in the hospital. You can't be there for your kid. Like I'm in Thailand right now, but I can be at home in 24 hours.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that separation is a challenge for a lot of people. So I'm just sort of curious. We're going off topic here a bit, but what are your thoughts on the prospect of finding 1 million competent people to go to Mars?
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Well, but okay. Yeah, but I'm thinking more like 100 years from now. He gets a few people to test it out. It's a pilot project, and then hopefully,
I'm saying even if it's a luxury community, right?
Okay.
Even if it's not a harsh existence, the first 20 years it's going to be a harsh existence, but you get it to the point where it's like comfortable living.
Yeah,
you're still separating yourself from your family.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, but the Mayflower, those people.
But they left a place that was suffering severe economic hardship, and a lot of them brought their families with them. I don't know about that. Did they bring their families with them?
A lot of them, yeah. The whole family.
Look, my grandfather came from Poland. Like his mother, my great grandmother brought him. I think he was the only child she'd had at that point. She had subsequent children. Left the husband behind. The husband came later, I think. So there was that. But those people were fleeing economic hardship.
Okay.
Right? Life on Earth's pretty good right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right.
Thailand is a relatively poor country, right? I think the GDP per capita is like $7,000 a year.
Yeah.
I don't know. Life here is pretty good.
Yeah, but the first people in the Mayflower, God, I think like a huge fraction died. They didn't know if they'd have enough to eat. So I think, give it a century. I think there may be people who are willing to go to, whole families may.
I mean, it's true that going from Europe to America was comparable to going from Earth to Mars. I think that's a fair comparison. Going on the Mayflower, going on the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, whatever, those early ventures were more dangerous. They were more dangerous, but the life you were leaving wasn't as good. I think the thing is people are willing to make the sacrifice when the life that they're living is already under threat. So, all right, you got a point, though. I'll take your point. So I want to go back to this question. I think your sense is Elon is powerful in the sense of his impact on the future of humanity.
Yeah.
And Joe Biden will not be remembered significantly, and Kamala Harris will not be remembered. When they're telling the history of the world 500 years from now, I don't know if any American president, maybe FDR, maybe Truman for dropping the atomic bomb will make an impact.
George Washington for actually creating.
George Washington and maybe LBJ for what happened in the Vietnam War because so many millions of people were killed. But on the whole, like, is any modern maybe Xi Jinping? Like, I don't actually was it Deng Xiaoping made such a radical change in China? Like maybe he he will stand out in the history books 500 years from now. But it's really tough to think about that.
But in China, they hate him. I hear there's an active campaign to discredit him. The communists don't like him. No, he probably did more than any person in the 20th century to bring people out of poverty. He probably brought 1 billion people out of poverty.
Okay, I gotta ask you another one of my political science theories, if we can call it a political science theory. I look at North Korea, and I'm like, this guy doesn't get it. And this is my theory about Deng Xiaoping that he figured out. It's like every government exists to steal from its own people. The primary objective of every government official is how much can I steal from my own people? Yeah. To the king, how big can I build my harem? How much money can I extract from the feudal lords over there, whatever. But the purpose of every government effectively is how much can I steal from my own people? And if your own people are poor, you can't steal that much from them. So the question is, if I'm running a country, how can I make the country successful so I can steal more from my own people while still preserving my ability to steal from my own people? And I think Deng Xiaoping figured out, we got people who are like going into the woods, finding tree bark and making soup from it and getting sick because that's the only way they can get it. My Tai Chi teacher told that story that he's from mainland China, and they were literally like stripping tree bark and making soup and getting sick, but there was some calories in it, right? How can I get it so that my people are financially successful and then I can steal more money from them?
Yeah.
Is there anybody who's come up with that political science theory of how governments operate?
There is an excellent book, and this is probably another one of my top 10 books of all time. It's called The Dictator's Handbook. It's by the lead author is Bruce Bueno de Mesquita.
I've heard that name. Yeah.
Pardon me?
I've heard that name. Yeah.
When we were at Stanford, and you remember occasionally we would go to the seminars that the professors would do, and usually I couldn't understand their. Bruce was at Hoover at the time. He would show up at those things.
Yeah.
And so he wrote this book called A Dictator's Handbook. Excellent book about how they're thinking. And his point, I think Bruce would say to you is that, well, they already figured out that if you're a dictator and you want to get rich, the way to do it is not to do it through the labor of your own people, because of the Laffer curve, people can just stop putting in so much labor. The way you want to get rich if you're a dictator is just take over all the resources. So dictators tend to exist more in the resource-rich countries, like those that have oil or diamonds or something. It's easier for dictators to take that money. By the way, if people don't want to read that book, if you watch on Netflix, it's called How to Be a Dictator. And it's largely based on his book. Excellent series.
But the point is that, Venezuela is resource rich. And Maduro and Chavez before him took control of the resources, and then their economy went to shit. Excuse my French.
I see. Yeah.
They end up not being very successful. The secret, I think Bruce is wrong then. The secret is if you can generate a thriving economy, then your people, like a free market economy, effectively a free market economy, as much free market as you can get it, will generate a lot more resources. And then if you can create a free market, a largely free market economy that allows you to peel off the top, to get your big, then I think you become more successful. And I look at Thailand. Thailand is a thriving country, despite the relative GDP per capita. I think in terms of quality of life, I think my quality of life here is better than America. Now I'm wealthy by Thai standards, right? But I'm paying $600 a month for a 2-bedroom condo. I'm looking out over the computer. I'm looking at my river view, and I go out to dinner with my fiance, and we spend about $10, and we have a nice meal. But I look at Thailand and I say I see a lot of dynamic growth. I see buildings going up, all these great things, and if the economy thrives, I will say that there's part of the establishment of Thailand, the political establishment of Thailand, controls a lot of the land, and whenever there's a deal, they get cut in on the deal. It's sort of like the way the things work. We want to spur the economy, but we get our cut. It's almost like the leadership of the country gets their cut. And, that's the joke about Joe Biden and the Hunter Biden emails or something is, the big man gets 10% or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of endemic in all governments, democratic, dictatorial, whatever, is really what's going on is the people in charge are just trying to get their vig. And if you're smart in that world, you want your economy to succeed. Because if your economy succeeds, then you get it. Then your vig is bigger because you're getting your 5%, or you're getting 1%, you're getting your 10%. And if you make your vig too big, then you're hampering the economy. So you got to make your cut has to be reasonable in order for the economy to continue to thrive.
But if you're the dictator, you have to credibly commit to say, look, if you start getting rich, I'm not going to take your money, or I'm only going to take 30%. Right. Now that's hard, right? How does the dictator commit to that?
Well, if you're a dictator. So, and this is the mistake that I think that by the Democratic Party messaging is like, they want to raise the vig, right? They want to take a much larger share. And I don't know if you know, there's a guy named George Hotz. He founded a company called, right now it's called Tiny Box. He founded a company that, he has a self-driving company, Comma.ai, that's like trying to solve self-driving on the cheap. And he basically posted today, if they do a tax on unrealized gains, I'm going to cause all my companies to lose money and drive them into the ground, and I'll collect on my unrealized losses or something like that. Like you are sending a strong signal to entrepreneurs. We don't want you to innovate. We don't want you to build companies. We don't want you to be successful, because if you're successful, we're going to take all your money. And it's so hard to be successful as an entrepreneur today, right? It's so the amount of work you have to put in, the amount of risk you have to take, the opportunity. If you're like a really good computer programmer, you could probably make like $500,000, $1 million a year just working for somebody else. Why would you start your own company? You would start your own company because you think you can make $1 billion. Like at $1 million a year, you're never going to make $1 billion, right? But if you can get in on a startup, and maybe you're the startup, or you're one of the early guys working on a startup, then there's this opportunity to get your equity stake, and you're going to get all this pile of money. And Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are saying, yeah, we don't want you to be able to make any money that way. Well, then you've just destroyed the innovation engine that makes the American economy one of the great things about the American economy. So does it make sense that, like you talked about Bruce's theory about the dictator, but what if you're not a dictator? What if you just have some power? Can you I would think I honestly look at Trump this way. Trump's like, no, we want a vibrant economy because then I can extract more from my family, right? Then Jared, look at Hunter Biden on the board of the Ukrainian energy company. How the hell did that make sense?
Yeah.
How did it make sense that Hunter Biden, with zero qualifications, is getting $50,000 a month to sit on the board of a Ukrainian, knows nothing about Ukraine, knows nothing about energy, somehow he's getting $50,000 a month? That's a politician collecting a percent off the success of the economy, right? That's how, the Ukrainians were buying access to control the American government.
Yeah.
Did Jared Kushner get some sort of sweetheart deals because Trump is president? Are there somebody in the Obama entourage getting that? Someone in the Clinton entourage? Clearly Dick Cheney was making money off of, everything the Bush admin. I shouldn't say clearly. It's my impression that Dick Cheney and people like Dick Cheney were effectively making money off what the Bush administration was doing. Am I making any sense? Is that's a way of looking at government? Is they all exist to steal money from their people, and the smart ones that grow the economy so they can steal more.
But even if you're the most cynical, I think Biden might have been the most corrupt of anyone since LBJ or something.
Yeah.
But I don't think he even got $1 billion. So I don't think, definitely not 100 billion, in payment, right? That's a tiny portion of the U.S. economy.
Well, he might not have gotten it for himself. He might have gotten it for his supply chain. I think if you think about it, not for their own individual wealth, but for the supply chain. Well, look at Obama. How much money did Obama have before he became a senator? What was his net worth before he became a senator? What's his net worth? Obama's net worth, he's probably close to a billionaire now. Hundreds of millions, I would guess.
Yeah, but the point of Bruce Pointer de Mesquita's book is that these dictators, they're getting.
But Biden and Obama don't have the option of being dictators.
Well, yeah, exactly.
But that's not an option that, at least not yet. That's not an option that they've made available to themselves. It may be that the strategy is, can we consolidate power enough that we effectively become dictators, and then we can command a much larger VIG. We can get people to pay us off more to get our control, to get us to influence the control of the economy. But, if you're not careful, you kill the goose that laid the golden eggs.
Yeah, exactly.
And did Bruce address that in the book?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's sort of a Laffer curve argument that, if, all you're doing is trying to maximize government revenue if you're the dictator.
Yeah.
And Bruce is saying, well, the problem is that people can just not work as much or move or,
Right.
And I wouldn't, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, if you say, where's the hump on the Laffer curve? What is the tax rate that would maximize the revenue to the government? Let me ask you, what would you guess it would be?
Somewhere around 20-25%.
Oh, that, okay. So when I took Econ 1 as a freshman, I remember in the textbook, it said 70% is going to be where you maximize the revenue. But there's a paper, it's written by Obama's first chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, Christina Romer. So it's written by this kind of economist coming from the left. She and her husband, is published in the American Economic Review, found that for each percentage point you raise the taxes, so if you raise the marginal rate from 37 to 38 for the highest rate and all the others, you add 1% to that.
Yeah.
GDP decreases by 3%. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you go through the math, you take the ratio of those numbers, 1% to 3%, that implies a Laffer curve hump at like 33%. That says like the most you can get, a tax rate at 33% is going to be what gets the most revenue. Anything more, you're actually decreasing the revenue.
Well, I would say there's a static view of what's going to happen over the next couple of years. And I'm thinking more long-term, like you're a young guy and you're making $500,000 a year as a computer programmer, and you've got this idea for a startup. Are you going to do the startup? And you're only going to do that startup if you think, I mean, maybe you just like, I think to some extent, people who do startups, like, I have to pursue this idea. This idea is eating me up. If I don't do it, it's going to kill me. So I think there's a question to, but is he going to be able to get funding for his startup? The VCs aren't going to invest. Like, you're a VC, you've got all this money. I can invest it in government bonds. If government bonds are paying 8%, and you got the risk premium on my venture capital investment, like, how much does you end up in this scenario where when you raise, because do you follow the All In Pod?
No.
That's Chamath Palihapitiya, Jason, David Sachs, David Friedberg, and Jason Calacanis. I remember a while back they were talking, if you raise interest rates, you discourage investment in venture startups, right? Because everybody who's making these investments in venture startups is thinking, well, what could I do with my money if I didn't put it in this?
Oh, yeah.
If interest rates are 8% instead of 3%, well, it makes less sense for me to put money in this risky venture startup because you're only going to invest in the most promising ones.
Yeah.
And maybe the one that's really going to be successful is the one that didn't look that promising at the start. So if you want a growing economy, and I'm talking about 5, 10, 20 years down the road, you need these startups to be able to get funding. So you need an entrepreneur who's willing to take big risks and walk away from what, the job that they had to go take this big risk and spend 5 years, not being successful to try to get there. But you also need the VCs to dump the money. And so it's hard to do that experiment. What's going to happen 5, 10, 20 years down the road based on a tax policy that you've adopted and an interest rate? Because it's not just taxes, it's interest rates too. And I would say also, I think tax rates have become irrelevant because they just print the money. Like our revenue is no longer tied to our government spending is no longer tied to revenue. They just keep spending. They don't care.
It's all borrowed. Yeah. Yeah.
It's borrowed or it's printed or whatever it is. If I'm not mistaken, they've basically just said they don't care about taxes anymore. You look at Kamala's economic proposal, it's all spending.
Yeah.
If you push them, they'll say we're going to tax the billionaires. Well, the billionaires don't have that much money.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't have nearly as much money as you think they have. Like if you took all of their money, that would pay for the government for like a week.
Yeah. Yeah. You ask her where she's going to get the money. And if she's honest, she's going to say, yeah, we're just going to add to the debt where we'll float some more, more government bonds.
People like Kamala and Joe Biden, they don't actually even care. They don't think about the economics. It doesn't matter to them. Their program, and listen, I ran for Congress, right? I was going around to like county fairs and county events, just events. There's 100 people, whatever. I would walk around. I would hand out a business card saying, "Hey, I'm running for Congress. Nice to meet you. What's on your mind?" And easily a quarter of the people that I talked to were like, "Well, I'd like the government to spend money on this." Right. And the smart thing a candidate would do if he wants to win the election is say, "Oh, we'll take care of that for you. Listen, here's my number. Would you send me an email later? Let's talk about how we can make that happen for you." Right. And I wasn't a smart politician, or I wasn't trying that hard to win an election. I was like, well, how do you want me to pay for that?
Yeah.
If you ask if a voter comes up to you and says they want government to spend money on X, and you say, well, do you want me to take that money out of your other pocket? You might have put money in the right pocket, but take it out of the left. No, I want you to take it from somebody else. Well, who do you want me to take it from?
Yeah.
They don't even care. The voters don't. So we've created a government system. Actually, I want to turn this to something. So it is my view that America is already largely a socialist country. And I'll tell you why I think that. If you look at government spending as a share of the economy, like whatever the GDP is, and you look at how much the government, and not just the federal government, federal, state, and local spending. If you go back for the first 100 years or so of the country, total government spending, it's usgovernmentspending.com maybe, tracks this. Total government spending for until maybe World War I, something like that. With a brief blip for the Civil War, total government spending was less than 5% of GDP for the first 100 years of the country. So America was 95% libertarian.
Yeah.
For the first 100 years or so.
Yeah.
And then pretty much with FDR, you started to see growth at the federal level, but the states followed. So when you add in state and local government spending, we're in the ballpark of 50% of GDP. And then that doesn't take into account the regulatory control. How much? So if government spends half of GDP and government regulations control another 25% of GDP, then we're like a 75% socialist country.
Yeah.
Does that make sense from that's not like a winning elections question, but like
I think
philosophy.
Yeah, I think easily above 50%. Yeah, I agree with you. I think about the jobs that my son might do, like almost all of them, are the things that are not in the private sector. And
well, you're in a private university. To what extent is your private university funded by government dollars?
No. George Mason is a state university.
Yeah. Okay. But even like a private university, even say Stanford, what percent of Stanford's revenue is coming from the government one way or another, whether it's student loans or?
Yeah, I think it's less than it might be a third, but it's not that high.
But that's my point. Even the private institutions, and then you look at private companies, right? So SpaceX is a very successful private company. Well, who's its customer?
Yeah.
Right. One of its biggest customers is the NASA and the defense industry.
I wanted to ask you something. I want to get back to Elon Musk. There's something. I also have an appointment at the Mercatus Center, and one phrase I can't remember is one of the fellows at the Mercatus came with this great term called permissionless innovation. Okay. Yep. And there's so many things where you need the government's permission to do something. And I started reading an interview with Elon Musk about the tunnels underneath the cities.
Yeah.
And it struck me, that guy's already building them. Do you think he just decided, I'm not going to ask for permission. He's already has started digging. And
no, the tunnels he built, he had permission that I know of. the tunnels he built he had permission for. And let me be clear, there might be an exception or two to this, but there's a tunnel in Hawthorne, California from SpaceX headquarters to some off-property location. Like they paid somebody, can we take this part of your lot? And there's like an elevator up from the tunnel on this lot. But that was permitted. You can't do anything in California without permitting. The biggest tunnels they built are in Las Vegas, and that went through a regulatory a process. It was at first the Las Vegas Convention Center. There was a bidding process to supply transportation inside the convention center, and they won the bid. And now they're expanding, and they've gotten government approval, and they're basically building a loop. It's going to ultimately be like 100 miles of tunnel under Las Vegas, up the strip and to the airport and to the stadium or whatever. And I remember this. This is, again, government officials care about themselves more than they care about their constituents. I remember I was watching this presentation to like a Clark County planning board or zoning board meeting or whatever. And there's this guy on the board, and he says, wait a minute, are you saying my commute is going to go from 30 minutes to 7 minutes? Not my constituents' commute. My commute is going to go from 30 minutes to 7 minutes. Well, yeah. Okay. Well, when can you start? Right.
Okay.
Right. And I have this theory that anything you do, whether it's a robo-taxi network or a tunnel system, you do it in Las Vegas and Orlando first. Why Las Vegas and Orlando? Do you know why?
Wow, no.
Okay, they're convention center. They're the biggest convention centers in America.
Oh,
and
wow. Okay.
Which part of the economy does more conventions? Local government officials. There will be a local government convention, a convention on this topic, and a whole bunch of local government officials will show up, right?
Wow.
And they get there, and they arrive in the airport, and instead of having to like flag down a taxi or hop on a bus or whatever, you just walk over here, you hop in this tunnel thing, it takes you right to your hotel, and it costs you $3. Wow, that's pretty cool. Why don't we have this in my town? And so the local government official flies back to his home airport, and he has to walk a quarter mile in the parking lot to get to his car or whatever. He deals with all the hassles of transportation in his home community. He's like, it'd be really cool if we had these tunnels here, right? Not because he cares about his constituents, for his own personal value. Like, we could have these tunnels here. That would make life a lot better. And I have this whole pitch for the tunnel system. Sorry. If you went to Cleveland and Cincinnati.
There's a whole chapter in that Bruce Pointed and Mosquito book about roads from the palace to the airport, how nice they are in these totalitarian countries. So,
there's a Pennsylvania congressman who had an airport built for himself, right? So he could go to DC.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
No, but the other theory I have on this is if you went to Cleveland and Cincinnati, if Elon goes to Cleveland and Cincinnati and says, I want to build a tunnel system for you, I'm going to pay for it. Okay. We're going to operate it. Here's how our pricing is going to be. We're going to give your government 10% of revenue. Okay. Cleveland says no. Cincinnati says yes. Right. 5 years later, Cincinnati has this fantastic transportation system, and the government's getting all this money from the transportation system. And anybody who goes to Cincinnati is like, what the hell did you guys do?
Yeah.
And they vote out the government.
Well, that's part
it's really more. But you're generating all this revenue, and I think that there's something to that. So anyway, I see Elon making life better on Earth. I don't see a lot of other entrepreneurs who are doing as much, and I think partly there's as an investor, I'm more of a B2C. I can understand the consumer side of business. Right, I can see how, as a customer, that the Tesla car is better for me, or how a robo-taxi in particular. We're heading towards a world of robo-taxis where the cars drive themselves. You don't have to pay a driver anymore, and you're paying $3 a mile for an Uber ride, and all of a sudden, with a robo-taxi, you'd be able to drive the price down to 25 cents a mile eventually, right? And I can see as a customer, and when I talk to students in Japan or Thailand about my idea for what's called a podcar robo-taxi, which is a single passenger vehicle. And I think I can drive the ride price down to 5 cents a mile, right? And they know what their transportation options are, right? So I see how you can make things better on a B2C level and how that can translate to a company being successful. There's this whole world of B2B investing where there's these companies like Palantir is a company that a lot of my friends are excited about. And they primarily are a government contractor. They supply some sort of technology to government agencies. And I can't and they're trying to like break into the corporate world, but they don't have a product for a consumer. So it's hard for me to see that. But
PayPal Mafia, right?
That's Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel funded it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I mean,
by the way,
I mentioned David Sachs on the All In Pod. He's also part of the PayPal Mafia.
Side note, I want to tell you something about me. I don't think you knew that. Where the PayPal Mafia? They all came. They were in
Silicon Valley.
Pardon me?
They were in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, but before that, they were a whole bunch of them were founding editors of the Stanford Review, kind of conservative libertarian magazine at Stanford.
Yeah.
I was one of the founding editors of that, but I never went to the meetings. It was my first year at the Stanford Business School. You knew me. So I was the intramural sports editor, but I never went to the meetings. If I had just gone to those meetings, I probably would have been yeah. So I like to say that, like, what Pete Best is to the Beatles, the fifth Beatle who never got it, I am to PayPal. I'm the Pete Best.
An outsider on the PayPal Mafia. You're on the edge. You're on the fringe.
Who just was kind of forgotten about and didn't benefit from it.
Okay, so we're heading towards the 2-hour mark. I probably want to wrap this up. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? I
wanted to ask you. Let's see. So I mentioned one book. I recommended the Dictator's Handbook. Yeah. The other one about Elon is the Walter Isaacson biography.
I read it as soon as it came out. I read it in 2 days.
And you recommend it? Is that the one? So if I want, like my son, for instance.
Yes. Well, so if you're an Elon junkie like I am, the first half of the book is like I already know all of that.
Okay.
But
it's the best book if you're going to pick a book.
Oh yeah, yeah. The other thing I would say is look for interviews with people who worked for Elon. I could send you a list, but there's a guy named Jim Keller. Jim Keller is one of the leaders in engineering chips, and he worked for Tesla for a while. And watch his interview with Lex Friedman. Watch Elon's interviews with Lex Friedman. But Elon's interviews tend to be like, if you're not careful, you end up pressing play and he says the same thing he said 100 times before.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? Yeah. Getting new information out of Elon is tricky, but interviews with Gwynne Shotwell, who's the COO of SpaceX. Garrett Reisman was a NASA astronaut, and he worked with Elon. Peter Thiel has talked about Elon a little bit here and there. When you look for people who talk about what it's like working with Elon, Andrei Karpathy recently, I actually have a video on my channel where Karpathy was talking with someone. I might have actually been at Stanford, and part of the interview, he's talking about what's special working for an Elon company. And I think you pick up a lot of nuggets and I don't think Walter Isaacson captured all this, right?
Wait, Andrew what? What's his name again?
Andrei Karpathy, Karpathy. Andrei Karpathy is, he's one of the top AI engineers in the world. One of the guys, he worked with OpenAI, he worked at Tesla on self-driving, he went back to OpenAI, now he's kind of got his own thing. He's kind of like a guru of AI programming. He was talking about how like Elon walks around Tesla and he's got this, he said he carries this big hammer. He's describing this situation where they're talking about their supercomputer cluster that's doing the training for the self-driving cars, right? And the engineers are like, we just don't have enough GPUs for our cluster. And he calls the GPU cluster guy and says, I want to double the GPU cluster over next, I want it done in 2 weeks. And the guy's like, well, we can't get that many GPUs from NVIDIA. He's like, hold on a minute. Hey, Jensen, yeah, I need, 50,000 GPUs. Can you get them to us by next week? And he's like, this is like live. And I'm not telling the story perfectly, but it's like Elon can just make shit happen.
Yeah.
He can call the CEO of NVIDIA and get an allotment of GPUs like that, right? Because I think fundamentally, like, the guys at Apple are worried that Elon's going to make a phone. And he says, listen, if you take care of this, I won't make a phone, right? I don't know. I don't think it has to be explicit. It's just like, well, we better help Elon out, because if we don't help Elon out, he might come after us, right? Elon is working on chips to like compete with NVIDIA, I think more like for internal use. But there's always that. And I think fundamentally, it's also like they respect him. If Elon calls and says, I need this, and like, yeah, and look, Zuckerberg is getting more GPUs than Elon. But if Elon calls and says, hey, I need this, can you get this to me? It happens. And a lot of the way people talk about Elon in the public sphere is like he's just a rich guy who hires good people. Okay, well, number one, he hires good people, right?
How good he was at finding good people.
Well, but you know, you can ask the question, why is SpaceX so much more successful than Blue Origin? Right? Around the same time that Elon founded SpaceX, Jeff Bezos founded Blue Origin. At the time, Jeff Bezos had a lot more money than Elon.
Yeah.
Right? So Elon's company has built the Falcon 9 rocket, is building the Starship, but the Falcon 9 rocket has done over 300 reuses of an orbital. Think about this. Like when you want to talk about accomplishments, okay, December 21, 2015 is the first time SpaceX landed an orbital rocket booster. They launched a payload into orbit. It was the Orbcom. I'm so much of a junkie, I know it was the Orbcom 2 satellite. They get the payload into orbit. The booster comes back and lands at Cape Canaveral. Right. First time that anybody has ever successfully landed an orbital rocket booster. We're approaching 9 years. No one else has even tried. Jeff Bezos has not launched a payload into orbit. SpaceX has had 13 missions to the space station, human missions to the space station. They've done a bunch of cargo missions to the space station as well. They've launched a network of, I think they're in the ballpark of 10,000 satellites for Starlink, right? They've done all these launches. They are, I think, something like 90% of all mass launch to orbit is carried on SpaceX rockets this year.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Okay. Jeff Bezos had more money than Elon when he started Blue Origin, has not launched a payload to orbit yet, has not tested a rocket capable, has not had a rocket on the launch pad. I think they're hoping to have what's called a static fire of the New Glenn rocket, which may be, you know, more successful than Falcon 9 if they get there. But by the time they get New Glenn flying, SpaceX has already successfully flown test flights of Starship, which is bigger than New Glenn. So the question is, if Elon is just a rich guy who hires smart people, well, why aren't other rich guys like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and so on more successful at starting other businesses and building up these great things? And the answer is because the thing about Elon is not just that he's a rich guy who hires smart people. He's an engineer to his core. And he will go into these meetings and he'll say, well, why don't we try this? And people think, oh, he's a dictator, he bullies people, whatever. It's like, no, someone will push back and say, Elon, we can't do that because. And Elon won't take that lying down. He'll fight him. Yeah. But if the other guy persuades him, okay.
And he always wants to do things quick. That's one thing I got from Isaacson. He's almost rash. Like, you know, when I work with grad students, often they're doing programming and like, do it slow, don't make mistakes. Elon is not like me.
There's a story about when they took over Twitter, and there was this problem with a server farm, and like they were spending all this money on servers, and Elon's like, well, why don't we just move all the servers to this one location? Like, oh, that'll take 6 months. Like, and Elon's like, I think we can do that in a week. And they fly over in a private jet, and they go into the server, and the guy's like, who are you? I bought this.
Elon helps with the labor. He's carrying all the stuff.
He takes out like a pocket knife and he starts unscrewing a screw and like moving stuff around. You know, you know, look, I've installed my own modems in a computer, right? I can relate to a little bit of this, right? He's just like, you know, 1,000 times more into this than I am, but he understands, like, you know, if you've ever run your own business, like what happens when the copier stops working, right? If you run a small business, you've got to figure this shit out, right? And Elon started with small businesses and had to figure shit out, and the businesses got bigger and bigger, but he's still able to relate to the small level. So yeah, I think the book is worth reading. For me, it's like, look, it's a lifetime. I would say since roughly 2019, I've just been all in on Elon. I've been making YouTube videos. If I make a YouTube video about something Elon's doing, I'm reaching it. I'm trying to understand it.
One question. Get back to an earlier topic. Yeah. So you said you think Trump is the one who would be most amenable and helpful for Elon. Yeah. What about RFK Jr.?
Fundamentally for me, I don't trust that RFK Jr. is legit. I don't trust that he's not just saying what he thinks he needs to say in order to get people to, support him. I don't believe in the guy. And then, there's that, look, I'm a libertarian who usually votes libertarian, and like, oh, your candidate doesn't have a chance of winning. Like, I normally don't care about that, because the difference between candidate A and the Tweedledee and Tweedledum from the Democrat and Republican parties, I don't find the difference that significant. I really see a significant difference here. And I just want to be clear. There's a thing that people say, but Biden passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which creates a $7,500 tax credit for EVs, right? And it creates these tax credits for battery manufacturing in the US. And Tesla is probably the largest battery manufacturer in the US. So there's some really substantial benefits to Tesla. And as a shareholder of Tesla, presumably I care about this. But I'm actually more driven by the mission than I am by my stock price. And
good.
The Inflation Reduction Act incentivized the other car makers to make hybrids. And it discriminates against Chinese EV makers and EV supply chain. And like, here's a question. I'm sorry, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. I think I've answered your question about RFK, and I want to just.
Well, I got one more statement about RFK, but go ahead.
Well, go ahead with your RFK.
Part of the reason I ask is the first question you asked, and I never got fully to the end point or an implication, that I said Kamala's odds went down today, like in the last few hours.
Yeah.
I searched the internet trying to find one that you suggest, that one policy that you may have. There's another possibility that maybe the reason is that there's a article on the New York Post says that RFK Jr. considering dropping out to join forces with Trump. So it looks like RFK may endorse Trump, and that maybe that was what caused Kamala's odds to drop.
If you look at RFK, like, I don't know how many states he's going to be on the ballot.
Yeah.
I think he might be on like 9. And listen, as a libertarian, this is the kind of issue that libertarian, like I will ask you about this later. I have this fantasy that I'm going to run for president as libertarian in like 2028. That's a whole another conversation. But
yeah.
Well, let's suppose Tesla stock like 20x's, and now I'm worth like crazy, because I own a lot of Tesla stock. Like, now I have all this money, and I can just say, you know what, I'm going to burn $2 million and run a presidential campaign.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I'll hit you with this now. My strategy is we only campaign in New Hampshire.
Okay.
And the goal is to win New Hampshire. Because I don't know how long it's been. I don't think any third party candidate has won an electoral vote in probably many decades.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So if you watch the mainstream media, they will ignore the libertarian candidate at pains to do so. They will almost never cover the libertarian candidate with any.
New Hampshire. Why would you pick that?
New Hampshire is the most libertarian state. It's or one of the most libertarian states. It's the home of the Free State Project. It's a relatively speaking a swing state, and it's a small state. So if you're going to spend $2 million on a campaign and you spend it across 50 states, you don't make a dent.
Yeah.
But if you spent $2 million in New Hampshire and you spent all your time in New Hampshire, like if you're traveling 50 states, how do you meaningfully maximize the impact of your time to actually influence votes? But if you said, I'm going to spend 6 months campaigning in New Hampshire, and I'm going to spend $2 million in New Hampshire, maybe you could get 34% of the vote in New Hampshire and pick up, 3 electoral votes. So the point about this is, if the polling shows that I'm winning New Hampshire, now it hits the electoral maps, and CNN and the New York Times, they all have to talk about the electoral map with this guy. And then now I'm getting free media.
Yeah. Okay.
And I would say there's also a spillover effect that I might start doing well in Vermont. I might start doing well in Maine. I'm never going to win Massachusetts or New York, right? But maybe all of a sudden I start doing well in Vermont and Maine, right? And the message, by the way, the campaign message is stop wasting money. When I ran for Congress, that was the campaign thing: stop wasting money. And there's a huge list of, it's sort of like the fleecing of America, and maybe it was NBC News or whatever. You just start talking about all the ways government wastes money. And I don't know if when I ran for governor, I had this bit.
Yeah.
Do you know what the head of do you know what the head of the New York Public Library was making?
No. Oh God.
I would ask people, how much do you think the head of the New York Public Library? I don't know, 120 grand, 250 grand, something like that. $689,000 a year. And I would go like, now, I have this theory, by the way, that a political candidate, and Trump really embodies this, a political candidate is really a stand-up comic. Okay? Yeah. So you try a line. If the line works, you keep using it. If you say a line and it doesn't work, you stop saying it. So I had this line. He's making 600, and you could hear, there's a video from some Tea Party event in like Rochester or Buffalo. And I say $689,000 a year. And some guy's sitting near the mic. And you can hear, oh my God. And there's like an audible gasp from the audience when they realize how much this guy's making. Right. And then I follow the line with, now it is a big library. Right. That's like a little bit of a stand-up comic bit. So it is really easy to visualize delivering that message. The problem is if you don't have enough money, not enough people hear the message. So if you focus on one location, and then if you win 3 electoral votes, you don't win the election, right? But what does it do for the next election? For the next election, I go to campaign contributors and say, hey, I've just proven I can win one state with $2 million. If I have $2 billion, I can win the country.
Hey, suggestion, you know that there's 2 states that don't have winner take all. So you can just run for like a region of the state. For instance, Maine. So if you win the congressional district, you get electoral vote. Just half of it.
Like I said, maybe I pull a couple more electoral votes from me. But if I win 3 electoral votes, the House is probably not going to choose me in a close race. Right? When the House votes, I'm probably not going to, let's suppose I end up stopping one candidate from getting the majority.
Oh my gosh.
Electoral votes they need. Then it goes to the House. I don't think the House is going to pick me. Right? But I suppose that's possible that you can play that game and then you're making promises, right? You're doing horse trading. But I'm not saying I wouldn't play that game, but I don't think they're going to pick me. But then you go down the road and 4 years later, you run again. And now you go to campaign contributors and say, look, I've demonstrated I can win one state with $2 million.
Yeah.
If I raise $200 million, I can win the country. Right. I can win enough electoral votes to win the country. And I that's a theory. As a political scientist, how crazy does this campaign strategy sound?
It's a long shot, but not zero chance. Right. Yeah,
I don't think you've seen a lot of third-party candidates who focused on one state.
Now you know that in the early part of the Libertarian Party, one of the electoral college voters went rogue and voted for the Libertarian.
I didn't know that. Okay.
The Libertarian has actually gotten a vote, and then they made him either the president or vice presidential candidate. That rogue electoral college guy.
Harry Brown. That sounds like a Harry Brown thing.
He might have been the one. And I think it was one of the Koch brothers became his vice presidential candidate.
Yep. David,
so the idea is that Koch brother was supposed to spend his own money. Yeah. So you should look up Mike Munger.
Okay.
So a friend of mine, he's a political scientist at Duke, also in the economics department. Yeah. He ran for governor of North Carolina on the Libertarian ticket, and got enough polling that he made the debate, actually. And I thought trounced the other 2 candidates. He might be your vice presidential running mate.
I was on the debate stage for the 2010 governor debate, and there were definitely media that said I won the debate, and it had a wide reach. It was 100,000 people or more watched it.
I listened to that.
Yeah, I had some good. You saw some of my stand up.
Yeah. And I saw you were right after the rent is too damn high candidate.
Yes. Yeah, he got more publicity. He got on Saturday Night Live and I didn't.
Yeah.
But I did, there was this, my favorite moment was the Republican candidate was a guy I consider a fraud named Carl Palladino. And I jammed him where he had a history of making campaign, he's like the supposedly, right-wing conservative Republican. He had a history of giving money to Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. And I said, why is a supposedly right-wing conservative giving money to Hillary Clinton and Al Gore and John Kerry and Hillary Clinton? He said he's trying to buy something. And I don't know if it was conscious, but he was next. And he froze.
Oh my
gosh. It was about 15 seconds where he's like,
wow.
I just totally froze him.
Wow.
I'm convinced he had an earpiece, and Roger Stone was controlling him. And Roger Stone's trying to get him to calm down and talk about this or something like that. But he just, if you watch that moment, he just froze. I just totally froze him.
Warren, also look up. It was one of the early U.S. elections. I think it might have been when John Quincy Adams became president, that it went to the House of Representatives.
Oh, yeah?
So no one had a majority in the Electoral College. Oh. And I think I have this right. They had to vote a whole bunch of times, and they made like a deal, right?
I'll say this. It's an idea. The probability that I'm actually going to go forward and, move to New Hampshire in 2028, it's pretty small at this point. I don't want to say it can't happen, but it is like, I would love to pursue it almost for like more for the political science adventure than the likelihood I actually become president. But I do think it would be fun.
Yeah. Well,
you can imagine like spending 6 months in New Hampshire, just going around to small towns and, diners and meeting people and shaking hands and getting events set up and speaking to an audience of 50 people here and there. And you do that, 3 times a day. In New Hampshire, it works. Nationwide, you can't make it work.
Okay. Hope you'll consider my idea. Go to Maine. Go to one of those congressional districts in Maine.
But see, the point is that New Hampshire is the size of a congressional district.
I think it's 2. I think it's 2.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I won't rule it out. I have family in New Hampshire, so that's got an attraction for that reason.
Okay. Well, you can go back and forth across the border either way.
I could see it expanding to Maine.
Yeah.
Maine and Vermont both. Yeah. All right. So listen, I want to thank you very much. I really enjoyed this. This will appear on the X platform first. I'm probably going to publish it on YouTube as well.
Okay.
How can people find out more about you and what you're excited about? Oh, we never even talked about academia. Oh my God, we're going to do this again sometime.
Love to. Yeah. Well, you can go to, I have a website, timgroseclose.com, or go to Twitter, Tim_Groseclose.
On X. On the
X. I can't do it. Warren, I'm too old. I think I'm going to keep talking about calling it Twitter.
I don't think you're older than me, so I don't think I'm going to let that slide. But
I think I am. 59 and a half. 59 and a half.
It's a post, not a tweet. It's a repost, not a retweet. Maybe it's a quote post, not a quote tweet. We'll work on you.
Maybe you can cure me. Maybe. It's going to be hard.
All right. Great.
Great seeing you. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Warren.